Welcome to the Everyday Junglist podcast. Actually, no, I'm wrong. It's the Intelligent Nonsense podcast hosted by myself, the Everyday Junglist. And I'm here today with Jen, my wife, my illustrious wife, beautiful wife, amazing wife, who has agreed to join me to talk about Hantavirus. And this one was not a hard ask. She loves infectious disease. And so I've only had to ask once, basically. She said, yeah, sure. It was just a matter of finding the right time to do it. So just quickly, by way of introduction, Jen has a big serious background in infectious disease, although she doesn't work in that area directly anymore, but spent many, many years working in that area, including in field work in the Daintree rainforest of Australia, but all kinds of other things, working with highly dangerous pathogens. She's also very talented, not only scientifically and intellectually, but also in the athletic realm, Krav Maga, swimming, basketball, the whole 9 yards. She's a very well-rounded individual. Let's say that. Leave it at that. In any event, thanks, Jen, for joining. Really, really appreciate you taking the time, because this is a topic that I think people are probably interested in. I know I'm interested in it. We've been talking about it a lot at home here almost every day since this thing started. And it's funny because last night, I wanted to start with something. Last night we were talking about actually Ebola for some reason, because we talk about infectious disease all the time. For some reason, I'm going to share my screen here. But as we were talking about Ebola, we started talking about Africa, because it was in Africa. There's an outbreak, correct? Right now, if I'm correct, Jen.
Yes,
Yes, in Africa. It's in the Congo, actually. So I asked, where is this? You can see my screen now, Jen. You can see it, just to confirm.
yes.
So we were talking about, so it's in the Congo, and I said, because knowing that Jen had worked in the Daintree, I was wondering. I said, I just like jokingly, what do you think is more dangerous, Congo, the rainforest of the Congo, or the Daintree where she worked? Because the Daintree is notoriously dangerous. And so I actually went into AI tool and said, hey, do a comparison here of the Congolian rainforest and then the Daintree in terms of danger, like in terms of creatures and that sort of thing. So this is what it came up with, and it's actually, I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, you look at the forests themselves, the Congolian rainforest. It's like 6 countries that it spans, and it's huge. 3 points, almost 4 million, square kilometers. It's 150 million years old, so very old. It's got 10,000 plus animal and plant species. The Daintree is smaller, much smaller by comparison, but it's also older, much older, 30 million years older to be precise. And it has less diversity, but it's still got a lot of diversity in terms of plants and insects. And the notable wildlife, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit more, was for Congo. Because we were talking about the big, large predators. What's the biggest predator in the Daintree? Is what I asked Jen, and she mentioned the saltwater crocodile. I think we talked about this last time I had her on the podcast, and it is the world's largest living reptile. It actively hunts humans. And Jen, you've done some wrestling, not wrestling. You've done some tagging. How many
No,
tests do you do?
I did some very careful sample taking with a team of people.
And they already had the crocodile tied down or held down, correct?
Yeah,
As I understand. So is it tied down, or they just hold it down
they
with rope?
usually tie the mouth, and then you have multiple people that hold them down.
And so how many people are we talking about, depending on how big it is? I guess that varies.
Depends on the size.
All right. So in any event, the bottom line here is that the Congolian rainforest is a danger to humans is only rated as moderate. Because of leopards being the apex predator, they rarely attack humans. So disease, malaria, Ebola, which is why we're talking about this, and venomous snakes are the biggest threats there. Maybe elephants, perhaps. And interestingly, perhaps not interestingly, I don't know. Jen's never been there, and you have no desire to see the Congolian rainforest, as I understand it from your
No,
description.
no, I don't.
And
No,
then
thank you.
the contrast to Daintree, where Jen has worked for 5 years, is slated as extremely dangerous, a 5 out of 5, because of the saltwater crocs is one thing. The cassowary is another interesting one to talk about. The taipan, which is the most venomous land snake in the world. The box jellyfish, which is also extremely venomous. They have funnel web spiders, stonefish, and they have these stinging trees that cause months of pain, and the giant centipede. So talk about the stinging trees, Jen. What are these called? What do they do besides sting?
They're
What are they
actually
called?
they're actually beautiful. They're very, very pretty, and they have the most beautiful red berries on them. White flowers. They're very fragrant. In the north, in the up in the Daintree, most of the flora is very has serrated edges. Like if you were to think about like palm trees and tropical
Right.
foliage on steroids, where
Yeah.
they have large hooks, they have lawyer vines that have big serrated edges and tendrils that whip themselves into the bark of trees. And in all of that, there's this beautiful tree with these beautiful fuzzy heart-shaped leaves that from a distance just looks like it would be the softest thing that you can possibly imagine. And that's where a lot of tourists get themselves in trouble when they go camping because they look at all of these things with really sharp thorns that are really hard and tough. And I mean, you're talking about plants that haven't changed a lot since the era of the dinosaurs. They've gotten a little
Yeah.
smaller. Some of them
Right.
have died out, but for the most part,
Yeah.
they haven't really changed a lot.
Ancient
So they're pretty
ancient plants.
durable. Yeah, they're pretty durable. They're really tough. But this tree has these beautiful little heart-shaped leaves, and from a distance, they just look like they're covered in fuzz and like it would be the softest thing ever. And if you touch it, it stings like a jellyfish, and it just keeps the
And so they're
toxin is very stable, it's very heat stable, so it just keeps
yeah,
burning.
right. So
And lots of people
the
get in
campers,
trouble because they use it for toilet paper when they're camping, and that's usually how they end up in the hospital.
months of pain. And that who I don't know who camps in the Dane tree. That it's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard of. First of all, but oh God, that just sounds
Lots
really
of
bad.
people, it's beautiful. It's
I
absolutely beautiful. The beaches are beautiful.
And the giant centipede, of course, which I also wanted to talk a little bit about because you have had some encounters with giant centipede, or you've seen them perhaps. I think I
I
got
have
it right.
not had encounters with them, fortunately. I have seen them in zoos, and I have seen them in research facilities,
Okay, okay.
but
And you've
thankfully,
heard
I
them.
have never
They make a
had
very
to.
they make an unusual noise, correct? They make a very scary noise.
Yes, and
I
it's
feel like.
indescribable. The best I can say is you'd have to Google it and see what sound the centipedes are, because it's not what
Well,
I would qualify as heartwarming.
yeah. Well, so you never saw one of these while you were there, but they are another featured.
No, so I saw them in zoo. I saw them at the
Well,
zoo, and
not
I
in the
saw them.
forest where you were working, but not in the
No,
forest where
thank
you
goodness,
were working.
no.
Okay. But they can get up to 8 inches long. A centipede at 8 inches long is a scary centipede, in my opinion. And they eat meat in addition to just in addition to other things, the smaller things, the invertebrates. So roadkill, they'll even take out small mammals, which is really crazy if you think about it for a centipede. And then you have the cassowary, which I didn't even know what this thing was until we were talking about it last night. And it's basically like a living dinosaur. It's sort of like the raptor from Jurassic Park. Basically, it's 6 feet tall. Apparently, they're really smart. They have this kind of raptor-like intelligence, right, Jen? And they hunt in teams or something, and they've been known to lure. They try to trick people by playing dead or something. I don't know what were you saying.
They'll lay down and get you, so you'll get out of the car. But they're ground nesting birds, and they're extremely territorial. So they are really, and they're meat eaters. I mean, they'll eat other things too. They'll eat berries and stuff, but they're omnivorous, and they're very opportunistic. So they can be quite scary. I mean, think of it as like an ostrich with a serrated beak that chooses to hunt you down when it can.
And they attack people. They have attacked people, or they don't normally, but they have in the past. So,
Usually not adults. The problem runs into when you have there one of two things. Either when you have people that are trespassing or invading the area where they have nests when they're raising young,
yeah,
and they'll
this
defend
guy
the
reading
young
the
to
paper.
the death,
This guy reading the paper there on the
or
beach.
or if you have children, because people are it's kind of like a mountain lion, right? A mountain lion in a lot of ways will not they're not going to seek out a person to contact because we're on the upper limit of their kind of size
Yeah.
and what they're willing to deal with. And a cassowary is kind of the same. But then if you put something like a 3 or 4 or 5 year old child, it's a whole different story.
Oh, fine. And then, of course, the saltwater crocodile, which we've already talked to death, so I won't talk more about it. But it is a huge and scary monster-like being that I don't want to ever encounter. So, any event, so on to the main topic, which was the hantavirus outbreak, the ship-borne outbreak, or started on ship, and now it's off the ship. And I've updated this yesterday with I think the latest, most up-to-date data as of yesterday, the 17th. Oh no, today's the 17th. As of this morning, actually, I updated this because there was one thing that happened yesterday that was pretty critically important. Actually, that's kind of interesting, and maybe a little scary. I don't know, but in any event, this is what you're seeing here: the 12 cases, the 3 deaths, 25% case fatality, and 23 nationalities affected so far. That's right now, as of today, this morning. That's the sort of the update, the high level. So of the 12 cases, you had 9 confirmed, 2 are only probable, and 1 what they call inconclusive, and then 3 deaths, which is a 25% case fatality rate, which is lower than the historical average for this particular strain of hantavirus, which is around 30 to 40%. And the 23 nations, of course, the U.S. also. And there's 23 nationalities in 4 countries, only 4 countries. 147 passengers aboard, passengers and crew, and the R naught of 7 on the ship. This is the basic reproduction number. And Jen, maybe you could explain to the people what R naught means, what the importance of it is, and how it's calculated.
So typically the R0 is calculated based off of a number of factors. One of them being how many people the average individual would transmit it to through normal interactions, how transmissible it is it airborne, is it contact borne, is it something you only get from close contact? And then what is I guess if you will, the lethality? How long is someone actually a viable transmitter of the disease? So to put it into context, something, and you have to consider too. So in this case, like an R naught of 7 is only on the ship. That's not
Okay.
pertaining to a normal environment because your on R naught goes up threefold almost when you're in a tight, confined environment with shared
Right.
resources, like a cruise ship, for example.
You're
So,
very
which
smart because
means,
you saw my slides because yeah, no, you're correct. That's exactly what happened. Because if you look at the, we'll get there. But yes, good point. Keep going.
yeah, which means that the true R naught is much lower than that. But it's probably much higher than on your average hantavirus would be 0.3 to zero point 0.9, which means that you really wouldn't expect it to spread before it either peters out or it kills its host, right? Because one person would transmit to one more. This one has somewhere more. Andy's strain has been published to have a 2.1, and this one looks a lot, based on the case numbers, like it has somewhere between a 2.1 and a 2.5, which means on average, for every person that's infected, two more people will, or 2.5 more people will pick it up.
Okay, so that's what that actually means. I see. And then the 42-day watch period is the monitoring period required, and that actually has been proven now, actually as of yesterday. And we'll explain that a little bit about that. But this is the timeline, and I don't necessarily need to go through all this stuff, but the May 16th, yesterday, Canada reported case 12, and this is on day 42 actually of exposure that this person in Canada who was in quarantine or who was in isolation confirmed as having hantavirus. So that basically says yes, the 42-day risk window is real, fully out the 42 days because they had no symptoms from exposure until day 42, at which point they got sick. Now they're saying mild. I don't know exactly what that means, mild. That's probably, I don't know how you, I mean, you're sick or you're not sick. And that early, I'm not
It,
sure how you can say
this
if
is
it's
this
mild or
is
not.
one of those that you never really know until you clear the infection, because people can get sick and they can be relatively mild or relatively okay until they're not.
Right,
And then they crash very, very quickly, and like too quickly enough that they may not even be able to make it physically to emergency services. So it
right,
kind of depends on it, somebody who just develops symptoms, you would expect them to be mild. Now,
yeah,
maybe they go the full length of infection and they stay mild. Maybe they're only symptomatic for a few days and they recover. Or maybe they make it to 10, 14 days and then suddenly decline. And there's no real way to know.
right. And so another key point here is on what happened this event number 5 here on the 24th of April when the ship allowed people to leave because there was concerns someone had died. People wanted to get off the ship, I guess. I don't quite understand the series of events that happened, but they stopped and they allowed people to leave the ship. So 24 people did leave the ship, including several Americans, I believe, or 4 or maybe 3. I can't remember what the numbers were. One of those Americans subsequently tried to take a flight to Haiti. Was it Haiti? Was it Haiti or was it somewhere else? Jen, I can't remember what you said.
Immediately, I think.
It was Haiti, and was allowed to leave the country. But when she arrived in Haiti, she was taken into quarantine by the Haitian public health officials. My understanding is she's still there in Haiti in quarantine and not being allowed
But
to return to the
but
United States.
so
But
far they've been
I
very
don't know.
fortunate, I think, in the US. So far, none of the cases that went to the place in Nebraska off the later disembark, none of them are symptomatic yet. And
Yeah,
only
and
the
they've been allowed to
two
leave now, but they haven't all now been allowed to leave. Correct? They've been allowed.
they're being offered the option to go home and self quarantine. So I don't know how many of them have actually done that or not. There were 30 to 40 people that originally got off the boat at St. Helena
Yeah.
when after the first passenger had died. One of them is the Dutch woman who took
Well,
a flight,
it says 24 here is what we have for the official.
but only a certain subset of those were Americans
Yes.
and that have largely returned home. So it sort of depends, what happens from here.
So, okay. And
But so far, it looks like it's mostly contained.
but the people who have left, or we assume there's some have, they've not been there 42 days. Correct? There's no
No,
way they've been there the full 42 days. Okay, that was the
correct.
sort of the interesting point there. But in any event, so this is maybe a little too detailed for this, but just pointing out that we believe we know. In fact, I would go so far to say as they know that this is a what they call single zoonotic spillover event. So there was one index exposure event, and they think it happened at this landfill near Ushuaia, I think Argentina. Was that Argentina? I think
It's in
it's one of them.
Argentina. It's in Argentina.
I guess the guy was a bird watcher. He was bird watching, and for some reason he went to a landfill. There's a lot of birds in your landfills, so I guess I could understand that. But and then following that one index case, you had all these other things that happened, and we know this because of the sequencing that they've done on different segments of the genome and the changes that happened or didn't happen within those sequences. Here's the transmission chain, and here is Jen's correct. Jen, you are correct. The R naught is actually 2.5. You said, well, 2.1 to 2.5, and you guessed it right. 2.5 for the community associated R naught. So that's not the ship, again, as you said, because it's an enclosed environment. People are tightly packed. You're going to have a higher R naught than you do in the community. And then that's the 2.5 is higher, much higher than hantavirus. It typically is. It's typically very, very low, actually. And it's even higher than some of the other Andes. I think one of the other Andes strains where there was an outbreak, where I think it was 2.1 or something, but in the event. And then the 42-day incubation window, which is now shown to be a real thing, which really needs to be respected. this is a good slide. I like this one here because it gives you a sense of how this virus compares to other viruses that are again that R naught number. And it also is a really good example of why you need to get your measles vaccine. Because you go from like these low R naughts to high, and measles is through the roof there at 15. And it's interesting because you think about like really scary things like Ebola, it's only a 2, and that's because the mortality it doesn't. I'm sorry, the mortality is very high, but it doesn't spread very easily. Am I correct, Jen? That's why that
Well,
was
it doesn't spread very easily. It spreads more easily than you think it does because because people when they die, they exude a virus-rich exudate from their skin and from their mucous membranes and stuff that's very highly infectious. But the reality on something like Ebola is, again, right, it has such horrific symptoms that people tend to they don't necessarily have to self-isolate. Other
yeah,
people will
right. Stay away.
isolate away from them
Right.
because the symptoms are dramatic and they're visible and it's very noticeable. And
Okay.
that's kind of what interestingly enough, that's actually kind of what happened in the original. So the only other known outbreak of the Andes strain of Hantavirus was in Apuyan, Argentina. I forget what year it was, but it ended up being 30 some odd cases, I think 34-ish. And in the initial, there was a super spreader event at a birthday party, which is how they knew that it could be human to human. And because the people that were closest to the table with the sick person, 4 of them got sick, but then there were a number of other people that were all the way across the room that had no physical contact that were also infected later. But then because it's hantavirus and the mortality rate without medical intervention is very, very, very high. Even with medical intervention, it's high, but it's not as high as it is without any intervention. The people, they didn't have to self isolate. They were isolated by the village because the village did not want to have anything to do with this virus.
Yeah, and they knew they were sick. The guy that was the so-called super shedder, had symptoms or did not have symptoms in that first outbreak? I don't
They had
remember.
mild symptoms. They had very mild symptoms. They
Mild.
thought they had like a cold or a flu or something, but it wasn't known what it was at the time of the.
All right. Okay. But this, to be clear, this particular strain of Andes actually has some sequence differences from that one, 2 or 3 sniffs at least, I think.
Only
So,
2, I think.
so anyway, it's very closely related, but not identical, not the exact same. But it may be derived from that one, probably is. But in any event. Interesting. I find this slide fascinating to look at because I mean, measles. It's crazy to not get the measles vaccine. Anybody who's listening to this, and if you have friends or family that is contemplating not getting the measles vaccine, please. We talked about this last time. It's crazy. It's just the dumbest thing you can possibly do. You're not only endangering yourself, more importantly, you're endangering me and my wife, and if anybody out there, especially pregnant women, you're very much endangering their lives, their unborn babies' lives. You got to get the vaccine. It's not a big deal. It doesn't. It's been around forever. It's really really safe, and you got to get it. You just have to. So this is case fatality. Also, this is a comparison. This is very similar. This is the that one was R naught, and this is when you look at the fatality rate. Again, here Ebola, we were talking about 45%. I think the latest outbreak is higher than that, right? It was like 80% or something. The
Ebola
fatality rate.
tends to be higher than 45% but part of that's in the areas that it occurs in, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in Central Africa and the Democratic Congo is not exactly one of the higher medically advanced things, but Ebola carries from real world wherever it presents, usually the mortality rate is very high, like in the 70% range.
Yeah. And it's interesting you look at measles as a low fatality rate, but there's significant issues if you get measles, even if you recover. Correct? Am I correct in that? You can have all kinds
No,
of problems, or no? You can recover fully.
usually the biggest risk for measles is women losing their unborn children. That is usually like the number one. I mean, it will kill children. It will kill unvaccinated people, and it can cause a respiratory form of the disease that's really nasty. But typically, most people recover from measles. The problem is that, like, for example, let's say I'm 6 or 7 months pregnant and I go to the grocery store, right? And my husband and I are really excited about our kid. We're looking forward to the baby being born in 3 months. We've decorated the nursery. We've painted everything. Maybe it was not easy to get pregnant, right? And so, but then there are a couple of wonderful people at the grocery store who have chosen not to be vaccinated for measles. And now that they have measles, they are refusing to protect the community that they live in by staying home. And so I touch surfaces that they touch, and I have measles, and I get to have a miscarriage, and we lose the baby. Maybe because the mom's immunocompromised, maybe you lose the mom too. Maybe I die too. And this is the problem with people not being vaccinated for measles. It is less of a I am all for I have no problems with people who choose not to get vaccines. But if you choose not to do that, you are accepting the responsibility to protect the people in your community that cannot protect themselves, right? You are accepting the responsibility that if you get the disease that you are not or choosing not to vaccinate for, you don't go spread that around as much as humanly possible while you're sick.
Well, unfortunately, many times you don't know they have the
And
disease.
and and that's well, yeah, the problem though is there are a lot of because people who have cancer, people who have leukemia, people who are
Yeah,
pregnant, there are a lot of categories of people that are don't have 100% immune system.
for sure. Yeah, we know that for
And the
sure.
consequences can be very, very high. It's and
Yeah,
that's really the issue with measles is that you can have a whole effect downstream that you never intended to, because I don't think most people wake up and go, I'm going to kill 6 unborn babies today. I,
no,
I I don't think that's where most people are when they wake up in the
I hope
morning.
not. I hope
And I
not.
don't think it even crosses their mind. So, I don't think that that's I don't think
Yeah,
that's the reality. But I think there is, but if you are infected with measles and you are out in public, you can have that effect even without intending to. And that's the scary part of measles, I think.
yeah. So what's ECMO? Tell me about ECMO. The impact here. They're saying that it helps reduces the risk reduction by 50%, or it reduces the risk. What is ECMO?
There's a lot of things like we're used with COVID and things where we have the ability to deliver oxygen in a much more efficient. ECMO stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. It's a form of advanced life support that temporarily can replace the function of the heart and lungs. So,
Okay.
like, there's a form of it that's almost like a liquid oxygen, but then there's another form of it that's the more common in a setting like Hanta, where the gets pumped to an artificial lung. The ECMO
Okay.
machine removes the carbon dioxide and oxygenates things. And actually, one of the women that I don't remember if it's the woman that was in South Africa or the woman that was in France who became symptomatic with hantavirus is actually only alive because she is still on
Like,
ECMO.
yeah, and that's probably the case. The 50% reduction they're talking about. I think it's too early. I mean, saying that sort of reduction based on one case or two cases is obviously that it's going to really
But
change.
the reality, like with ECMO and hantavirus, is you have to be aware of what you have in the stage that it's mildly or moderately symptomatic with an
Yeah,
emergency plan and a medical facility that even has one available.
yeah,
Not everybody has ECMO
yeah,
in case you crash. And that's I think is for the people that have chosen to stay in Nebraska. I think that is part of the motivation that they have to stay, because if they become symptomatic, those
yeah.
support facilities are
They have to.
available at
Right,
Emory and are available at that facility in Nebraska, whereas your
right,
average emergency room doesn't have ECMO units on standby.
right. Yeah, maybe that's what's keeping them there more so than worried about other people, but worried about themselves, which fine, as long as they stay, in my opinion. But so there's been a lot of criticism about the U.S. response versus what the rest of the world has done, and the WHO recommended response. And I put a slide here, a comparison of how they actually have differed. And so, in terms of response, I mean, there has been a lot of mobilization of people and resources. It's not like the U.S. has ignored this or, completely dropped the ball. But they've done some things that are questionable. They've made some fairly stupid moves, like silly moves, I would call them. And they've definitely not taken the conservative approach, which is what I would recommend in a case with like this, where you have such high stakes. But they did do this repatriation in a private non-commercial plane from the Canary Islands to Omaha, Nebraska, where they say it's a UNMC. It's one of the CDC's regional biocontainment labs there, where they're being held. But there's no federal or state quarantine orders, and there's just a voluntary 42-day monitoring. So they're encouraging home quarantine, but they're not mandating it. And they're testing only symptomatic persons with exposure risk. And they're saying, and it's a PCR test, it's a research use only test, which is fine. No problem with that. That's going to be the case. And they have had, numerous communications. But WHO has obviously taken this really very seriously too. And they are mandating, they're having differentiated risk tiers. There's high risk and low risk. And there is a lot of coordination going on at the global level between the countries that are involved in multi-country case management that the U.S. is not involved in, unfortunately. And so they're not sharing information, or we're not getting information. They're not sharing information. And so there's been the WHO has basically said there's an erosion of U.S. public health capacity. And there's been tons of cuts to surveillance and research and the workforce at CDC and other public health agencies. And they're flagging it as a systemic global vulnerability. And they're saying that this outbreak is potentially a dress rehearsal for one that could be much, much more damaging than this particular one. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. But I think there are some fair criticisms of the way that the U.S. has handled this. And there are people involved in the U.S. at both the political level and the scientific professional level, and it's not clear to me who is actually responsible for what. So if you look at the U.S. CDC and who they're calling the outbreak incident manager, is a guy by the name of Dr. David Fitter, who I believe was in some sort of a press conference yesterday with CDC, and he's apparently very well respected. I was looking at his LinkedIn page. 14-year career epidemiologist at the CDC. He's from the University of Chicago, John Hopkins trained. He was an EIS officer. That's the Epidemiological Inspection Service, highly prestigious and highly sought fellowship program. I mean, people that get into that, are some of the best of the best. I was an EID fellow myself, which is a similar kind of sister program. But anyways, and he's not really known by anybody, by anyone, but his professional colleagues is my take on the guy. He seems like a professional, the kind of guy I would know, like, or Jen would know, that we would work, a normal professional scientist, right? That people respect, a colleague. And then you have on the political side this guy Admiral Brian Christine, who is the Assistant Secretary of Health, and apparently he's a four-star admiral, recently promoted, I guess, in the U.S. public health system. So not in the military. This is the U.S. public health system ranking as an admiral, and he's a urologist at the Urology Centers of Alabama. And he's mostly known for his pioneering work in penile implants and prosthetic urology. He's best known for hosting the show called The Erection Connection on YouTube, and he's mouthed many conspiracy theories about COVID-19, including that it was a deliberate attempt to influence the 2020 elections, and he also said that the vaccine was ultimately proved not to prevent the disease and not to prevent the spread of the disease. Which, if you ever hear scientists say the word "proved," you got to question. I immediately question their credentials and their legitimacy, because it's just saying that sort of thing, and to say it about that is really well outside the norm of what's acceptable. He described the American response to the Hantavirus outbreak as what a strong public health system looks like, somewhat debatable, and he maintains that the current response demonstrates federal capability and integrity. And again, it may be questionable by some, but he has said one thing, in my opinion, that is correct about SARS-CoV-2, which is that most people who got infected aren't going to die. That is absolutely true, and that most people who get infected aren't going to get sick. Now, that second part I don't necessarily agree with him completely, because there's not enough data to say for sure that most is actually a majority of people. I would have said it differently. I would have said they're only going to get mildly sick or not noticeably sick. So he has said at least one thing that makes sense about COVID. But getting off topic there, we're talking about Hantavirus and this guy, and to me, it looks like a political kind of appointee, not necessarily a Hantavirus expert by any stretch. I don't know, Jen. What's your thoughts? Do you know anything about the guy other than what you told me?
No, I don't.
Are you impressed with his resume and background as I am? You've not seen the show. You've not seen the show, The Erection Connection.
I I
I've not.
I
I've
I
not
I
seen
don't
it.
know. It could be interesting though, because I mean, hantavirus. There have been some. There's limited data on hantavirus in general because there's not a large number of outbreaks every year, right? Most people get it from vacuuming and inhaling dead rodent feces. But there is evidence, and there has been significant data that has shown that it can persist in the testicles of men for up to 6 years, and might be something that after they're no longer symptomatic is like an STD.
So they can
You know, there's
transmit it. They can then transmit it to others.
well, there's
Sexually.
there's never been any demonstrated. Again, you're talking about, not very many cases on average per year, right? And usually these cases remain isolated wherever they
Yeah.
are,
Right.
because this is kind of a different setting. It's like, for a good example would be, there was a famous actor whose wife got hantavirus from vacuuming her floor. I can't remember what her name was right now. And, but she got sick, she went to the hospital, nobody else in her family got sick. That's typically how you see hantavirus. These outbreaks like in Apulia in Argentina, or this on the cruise ship, are very unusual. Usually it's a setting where, like, maybe one person or two people happen to be in the same area where rodent feces were aerosolized, and they don't transmit it to anybody else.
Yeah.
That's usually what the data tends to look like. But there have been samples and things that have tested positive where people have continued to test positive in protected spaces like the testicles for up
Yeah.
to 6 years.
And then there's an open question as to so if you are infected and are not showing symptoms, how easily or not you can actually spread the disease while you're infected and not showing symptoms. And that's a key factor here. If it's easy to do that, as it was with COVID, with SARS-CoV-2, then that's a big problem. If it's not as easy to do that, maybe it's not as big of a problem. But it also depends, of course, on the viral load, the amount of virus that you're actually shedding, infective virus, I should say, that you're shedding. I don't know, Jen, what's your
Okay.
take on
And I
that part
think,
on that question?
well, I think it goes back to the same thing we're dealing with right now. Part of the problem with hantavirus is that it has up to 42 days of incubation. So we're in the window right now where we're seeing all what's called the generation 2 cases. So your generation 1 or generation 0 are the first guy on the cruise ship that died and his wife. Right? And it's not clear whether they were exposed at the same time and then transmit it to other people, or whether he was the only one that got it and then he gave it to her and then she
Well,
gave it
I think it
to
is
other
clear. I think
people.
it is clear. I think it is clear. I think that the sequencing has shown that it was a single index. He had it. He's the only one that was
Right,
exposed.
right, but he and she were both at
Yeah.
the same place,
And
right?
they didn't have a sample from her. I don't believe that
And
was
they
the
didn't,
issue.
yeah. So the place that we're at right now is we're waiting to see what the final tally is, if you will, on the people that develop symptoms from this group that were on the cruise ship, and how many of those people that develop symptoms die. Until the end of the window period closes, which I think is like the 19th or so of this, like in 2 more days, we're not going to actually have the numbers on the total number of people who got sick, or the total. And then from there, even just because they're sick, it's going to be another probably 2 weeks before you know how many of those people were mild, how many of those people were asymptomatic and positive, how many of those people are severely ill but recovered, and how many of those people die. So there, right now, it's kind of in that there's no real way to know. We can guess. So it's like right now it looks really good, and hopefully it stays that way, that there aren't any more of these cases outside of containment in the US, but it's too early to know. And then you get into, we're not even in the window yet for the generation 3 cases. So, like, for
When does that
example,
start? When does that window start? Do you
that
know?
window starts May 24th, is
May
would it
24th.
be day 22. So you're looking at essentially, like, for example, the Dutch woman who got off of the cruise in St. Helena because she was sick. She took the flight to Johannesburg, and then from there, she tried to take an international flight, but they pulled her off of the flight because she was too sick to make it, and she later died that same day at a hospital. The people that she directly contacted on that first flight, we're not going to know whether they picked it up from her or not until for weeks. And the same is true of like
Are all
in
of those people on that flight in quarantine or in isolation, or we don't know that?
all of her direct contacts, only the people that like were in proximity to her.
But
They were
everyone else
self
on that plane,
whatever they can.
everyone else on that plane potentially could have been exposed as well.
Well, and so again, this is kind of one of those. There's no point right now in panicking on it,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
as of right now, it looks like all the generation 2 cases are contained. Maybe they are, hopefully, maybe not. But we're not going to know that for weeks. So if the window starts May 24th for the earliest symptoms, and then you've got 3 more weeks after that, you're talking about not really truly knowing what the situation is until June, the middle of June.
People's attention spans are very, very short. And people by next week will completely forgot about Hantavirus until 3 weeks from now. All of a sudden, people start dropping dead again. If that's the case, I hope that doesn't happen. And I guess I'm optimistic that's not going to happen, but it could. And if people, so don't forget about it. I guess my point is don't forget about it. And you could easily forget about it because yeah, it's a long time. I mean, it doesn't sound like a long time, but it feels like a long time, 3 weeks. So, but anyways, for clinical management, so ribavirin, people, if you've heard, they said, oh, you can treat with ribavirin, which is an
No,
RNA.
yeah.
You cannot. And what is a ribavirin, Jen? Can you explain?
It's an RNA polymerase inhibitor. It's broad spectrum, but it's never been shown to have any significant efficacy.
and
with
that would work.
hantavirus. The essential
Why would they
case,
believe? Why would they think it might work against hantavirus though?
because it's an RNA virus. So the hope is that maybe it will help. It's sort of one of those situations where it gets given to patients with a viral infection for which there is no treatment, for which there is no vaccine,
Yeah,
to hope that it improves things or does something. But there, in this particular case for Hanta, there's been no shown efficacy.
yeah. And I think this is interesting. I mean, all confirmed or even probable cases require ICU level care immediately, which is kind of interesting. That shows you how serious it is, and all the
Well,
courts
and
took on.
it's I would say it's serious enough that the 12 healthcare workers that treated the one woman in the Netherlands are all now being quarantined as well,
Yeah,
because their government determined that the handling and isolation measures were not sufficient to prevent them from contracting the ND strain.
yeah. All right, this is the last slide, and this is just on. And I think I like these. I think these are pretty good conclusions or key lessons. You know, and I think we talked about it. It was a single event. Looks like, but it had a global impact, and that's the case a lot of times with outbreaks. That's what the issue is, and it was a confined space, so that's why you had that higher R naught value. IPC measures must be activated immediately. I'm not sure what IPC. What is it? Infection control. What is IPC?
Mhm.
Is that what that means? Infectious protection control measures, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. ECMO is life saving. Yes, in one case, I guess so far. I think that's got to be remains to be seen. I'm sure it's helpful. Can't hurt. 42-day watch non-negotiable. I think that's a really important point because and then right now that is not being observed here in the U.S. It looks like at least not enforced. I think voluntarily the idea is that people are hopefully will respect that, but it's not being enforced in the rest of the world. That's being enforced and being enforced with police power and the power of law basically. So people are being forced to quarantine or isolate if they're suspect or probable cases. There is concerns in the global community about the capacity, the U.S. public health system capacity. I don't know if they're warranted or not. It seems like based on what you see is in terms of layoffs and people let go and the public, or people leaving the public health system and not being replaced, that could be a real concern. But we just
Well,
don't know.
the other problem that they're worried about too, I know, and I've heard this on several virology circles lately, is they're worried about the insurance situation in the US, is that because a lot of people lost their health insurance this year or have let
Yeah,
it lapse because of higher premiums, if somebody starts to develop symptoms, are they actually going to seek
right.
medical care?
Just
And that is a, again, that is kind of a question too, where it's like, you have some of the other countries where people are being very vigorously monitored, like they're physically being checked in on and they're having samples taken and tested on a daily basis by health officials to really truly know what their status is. In the US, the setting is more the people that go home, they're reporting in by telephone what their temperature is,
yeah,
but they're not having that same level of scrutiny. So, this is a fear factor, right? And you can imagine if you were one of those people that was quarantining at home and you started to feel a fever or flu-like symptoms, there could very easily be, to a certain extent, some desire to contemplate, could it maybe be food poisoning,
yeah.
or could it
Something
be a
else. Yeah,
cold,
right,
or could it
right.
be anything else other than
Yeah,
this terrifying virus
right,
that
right.
could kill me? So I think, there's gotta be some understanding there too, but I think this is also part of it is how rapidly would someone quarantining at home actually seek
Yeah.
medical
I'm, gue-
care?
I'm guessing the Hantavirus PCR test is not cheap. It's not like COVID where they were making millions of those kits and tests, so the cost is coming way down. This is a very
No,
rare
it has
new
to be run
virus,
by a specialty laboratory.
and then I'm sure that's like not a kit. There's no kits out there for Hantavirus. These are going to be custom PCRs, individual reagents, making master mixes. One, I mean, it's going to be painfully slow and painful to run, but so it's not going to be cheap for sure. So it's gonna if the insurance doesn't pay for it, paying out of pocket for it, it could be pretty painful. So, in any event, I think I don't know. What's your overall take, Jen? How do you feel about the risk for people? Or obviously, you said people shouldn't be panicking. People should never be panicking, in my opinion, ever. Well,
I
maybe
think it's too
sometimes,
ear I think it's
but not.
honestly too early to tell. So
Okay.
far, it looks contained, but you're only talking about the Gen 2 people, and it
Yeah,
depends. It entirely depends because it could go a number of different ways. It could go, all of the Gen 2 cases are confirmed. It was caught early enough that no one really had substantial contact with anybody else, and that's it. Done.
yeah,
Or we could see that there are a number of generation 3 cases from people who were contacted from this group of people that left the ship early, and maybe some of them are mildly symptomatic or positive, but not enough to really draw scrutiny. And we start to see more cases from there. But there's really, I don't know yet. I would
What's
say
the
there's
status
no
of the
way to.
vaccine? So there's been some questions or talk about hantavirus vaccines in development. Some people speculating that this is a desire to gin up sales of hantavirus vaccine or force people to get the hantavirus vaccine.
There is no hantavirus vaccine as far as I am aware. Even from some of the military stuff, nothing ever worked well. So there is no vaccine.
But there was work ongoing, or there is work ongoing, or you don't know the status of any
There
current
was
work.
work from 1935 until somewhere in the vicinity, I think, of 1998 going on. But as far as I'm aware, and when I went through graduate school, every vaccine that was trialed actually failed.
So
So
I've heard that in 2023 the programs were restarted at Pfizer and a couple other places, Moderna as well. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if you've heard any rumors
it's
either.
on the list for things that they wanted to look at, but it's also on. It wasn't funded as far as I'm aware. It wasn't actually taken beyond that because there was no viable
Need, right? I mean,
testing
there's no
platform.
market, and there's no market, right? I mean, it's one of these things where, yeah, to work on something like that without it would be high risk if it hasn't
I
worked
honestly
before.
think that anybody who's advocating that this is created to test some sort of new vaccine is wishful think is subject to wishful thinking, because I think the reality is if there is no if this is not contained and we learn, by mid-June that we're starting to see emerging cases from an active hantavirus epidemic,
Yeah.
there's not going to be a vaccine and there's not going to be any treatment.
Well, we're gonna
And
wish there was.
it's going to take months to develop a vaccine,
If they can, because
maybe
they failed.
years.
Yeah.
So
If they failed for however many 60 years to do it with some effort, I think there was some significant effort early on back in, well, this a long time ago. So obviously things have changed, but in any case, I don't think the outlook is good to have a vaccine anytime soon if this does go kind of worst case, and the
and
treatment
I
drug
will
treatment
say
option either.
from my knowledge of it, I think there was a significant amount of effort and money put into it to develop a vaccine back in the day,
Yeah.
because it was considered, because of its high mortality rate and its lack of transmissibility from person to person, it was considered, like back in the 1930s, to be a candidate for bioweaponization.
Yeah.
So I think that there was a considerable amount of effort and funding and expertise put into trying to develop a vaccine for it. In maybe in that context, along some of the others, which, I mean, thankfully we haven't gone down that road any further.
Yeah.
But there
Well,
was nothing
there's
successful.
persistent rumors of a warfare program in the U.S. at that time, which released a hantavirus strain into the environment in the Four Corners area and supposedly infected a whole bunch of people. And that's all rumor. As far as I have no idea one way or the other. It sounds semi-plausible, like many rumors do, but when you get to the detail level, things start to fall apart and break down. So I have no opinion on that one way or the other than to say it sounds like it's something someone could just make up, and it sounds good, but probably not, the facts probably are not agreeing with that hypothesis, but maybe not. One never knows. Anyhow, I think my opinion is similar to Jen's, that this is which we have to wait, remains to be seen. I'm not worried. I'm not super worried at the moment, and even if it starts to go more and more cases, I I'm not the kind of person to panic about stuff like this. I think you got to stay calm. I mean, there's no reason to panic. Even if it starts to get more and more people get sick, it's still going to be a small segment of the population. And if people are smart and are diligent and take care of, pay attention to themselves and the risks they're willing to take or expose other people to, it should be relatively easy to keep this under control, in my opinion. But it could be wrong. Hopefully, I'm not. But anyways, that's just an opinion, and I've been wrong many, many times before. Did I say that? I didn't say that out loud, did I? I've never been wrong, just right, Jen, correct, Jen? You're supposed to say yes. You've never been wrong. Hello?
Mm. Mm.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for joining. Whoever else joined. Looks like some people did join live, and hopefully more people will watch this as when I post this later. So thanks everybody, and hopefully got some answers if you had questions about it. If not, you can always shoot me a note or whatever, and if I can't answer it, I'll shoot it to Jen, and she definitely can answer it. So take care, everybody. Talk soon.